Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible Hour podcast. We're doing this elaborate breakdown of all of the history stuff that happens leading up to the reign of Xerxes and the political events surrounding the era depicted in the book of Esther. And I'm a little bit sad about this, but today is the last day we're going to spend with Darius the First, the Great, the father of the king of the book of Esther, King Xerxes. And he's had a good run. If you're Darius, it's good to be king because you win at every turn. You've put down 9 rebellions. You are presiding over the Persian Empire at its greatest extent. You won't back down from anybody, and the whole world knows it. You've got this remarkable reputation, but there's this one little burr under your saddle way out west, not with all the Greeks. Most of the Greeks are agreeable, but with one batch of Greeks way out west who you still need to go and punish for their role in rebellions that had happened earlier. Well, finally, in 490 BC, Darius gets around to doing something about these pesky Greeks, and he puts together an expedition to go and deal with particularly the Athenians. That expedition is going to be led by a couple of generals, Darius and Artaphernes, if you happen to be into remembering the names of Persian generals from a long time ago. These two generals load up a massive force and move them overland on the King's Highway, where they're going to be supported by and transported by a fleet across the Aegean. That fleet, everywhere it touches land, is going to be an absolute shock to the people there. You're going to have a refugee problem happening. As people are fleeing this presumed coming onslaught. At least on paper, it looks like Athens and the other Greek city-states are going to have no chance whatsoever. And while some might have scattered or even switched sides, we discovered that the Athenians are not the running kind, and they dig in and even specifically solicit help from their Spartan neighbors. But the Spartans reply to the Athenians that they are busy right now because they're having a festival, but they will come and have a war to help you with battles and things like that a little bit later on. They just have to finish their party first. So when it comes right down to it, on September 10th, 490 BC, a day which will live in infamy, it is Athens and a few buddies against the might of Persia. And it's really interesting the way they meet up on the battlefield, because I told you that you got a couple of prominent generals for the Persians, Darius and Artaphernes. These people are related to Darius. It is very dynastic. That is, the military presence on the battlefield, the leadership is reflective of the dynastic values of the Persians. But over on the other side, you got all of these Greek strategoi, these different leaders from different neighborhoods and people groups around Athens, and you're going to have one archon whose job it is to lead the whole crew. There's some really big name Greek rock stars in this crowd, including the famous Aristides, the just Miltiades, and the very ultra famous Themistocles, who will come into play in a fight against Xerxes, the son of Darius and the king of the book of Esther, a little bit later on. So the Persian fleet pulls into Marathon, Greece. It's a little shallow area. It's kind of boggy and marshy, and it's about 25 miles. Well, actually, we know, I suppose, exactly how far it is from Athens, because the legend that grows out of this is what creates the distance that people still run to this very day in marathons, that being the distance from the battlefield, the battle we're about to talk about, back to Athens. I'm not going to take us all the way down the rabbit hole here, but it's very interesting to read the ancient sources on this. It looks like nobody was even sure if there was going to be a battle this day, or if the Athenians would even view it as advantageous to meet the Persians in battle. But as is so often the case, when you encounter these fault line moments, these watershed moments in history, there's just something in the air that day that prompts people to decisive action, and that's what happens. Maybe there's some confusion in the ranks or with the communication, but whatever the case, the Athenians engage downhill toward the Persians, who are down in this more marshy, boggy area. And long story short, the Athenian heavy infantry is able to close the distance, put pressure on the Persian middle, and eventually the Persian line breaks. They go into free fall and the rout is on. and the Athenians chase them down from behind. And to hear the ancient historians talk about the numbers, they slaughter 6,400 Persians and capture 7 of their ships, while the Athenians only lose 192 of their own and 11 from outlying groups who were helping them out a little bit. So it seems like this is great news if you're Team Greece, but the reality of this kind of ancient warfare, where one side has all the boats and the other side really doesn't, is that here, even the losers in this situation can find consolation if they can make it to Athens first, because the Athenian army isn't in Athens. And so then this is where, over time, the legend of the Greek runner who runs that marathon to go and get word to Athens, because they're all over there saying, I need to know what happened in this battle so we can either evacuate the people or we can start celebrating. And so according to the story, this runner gets ahead, and then because the army that's still there at Marathon knows that they're flirting with time, they basically do their own fully armed sprint back to Athens to try to get ahead of that fleet. Apparently they do so well enough that the Persians decide that their best course of action is just to go home. And just as an interesting side note, if you go to the side of the battlefield, there are still 2 mounds there where the Athenian dead are buried. It's beautiful. It's covered in wildflowers. And I don't know if you can climb that hill or not, but you can go right up to it and see it. And it's a pretty neat point of contact with this very, very ancient incident. Now, this is a pretty interesting moment here late in the reign of Darius, because if you're that particular king, you don't know how it feels to lose. All you've done is win at stuff. But if there's any saving grace to this situation, it would be that, one, this happened a long ways away and people aren't going to really know about it in your own empire. And 2, you still have all the resources of Persia to go back and take another crack at it. And so that's what Darius decides to do. He, in the early 480s, starts to plan his own invasion of Greece that he will personally see to. And the only reason he doesn't get around to it is that there's some other little challenges and uprisings that happen in Egypt. And by the time Darius is finally geared up and has his slate, his schedule cleared out enough that he can go and punish the Athenians, he gets sick and he dies in 486 BC. Now, as the king of kings of the whole world of Anshan and Persia and everything Babylon, Darius wasn't the kind of guy who was going to restrict himself to one wife. He had a pre-king wife who bore him some children. But then after he became king, he married a couple of the daughters of Cyrus. I think he also married one of the daughters or maybe the wife of Bardia. I mean, man, that is a thumb in the eye for that family. But there's one daughter of Cyrus in particular, a lady named Atossa, and she seems to have been quite formidable because even though her favorite son was not by any means Darius's oldest son, she got him pushed to the front of everything. And by the time Darius dies, this kid, Xerxes, is a full-grown boy, and Atossa is played in such a way that it is going to be all or nothing. Her kid is going to become king, or she and all of her branch of the family is going to be wiped out by the next king. But it does work out. Xerxes becomes king, and part of the process of spreading his wings and learning to fly as a young king is going to be finishing off what his dad started and personally leading the invasion of Greece himself to restore his family's honor and to stabilize and subdue these rebellious Greeks at the far western end of his empire. And I believe that how that particular endeavor of young King Xerxes works out has a lot of bearing on how the book of Esther and the story we read there works out. So tomorrow we'll talk about all of that. But again, for the purposes of our time with King Darius, that represents the end of the line. All right, Jeffrey. Well, handle this one with care. Best of luck with that, buddy. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.